I was making some good old page load animations when I thought, can we make these better? Every time I have this issue where if I use GSAP to make them, then I have to deal with the initial flash where GSAP needs to load, but my content needs to be somehow styled in the initial state of the animation. If I use Webflow animations, then on bigger sites I give up some performance. So it got me thinking, how can we make it as performant as possible, but also not too hard to manage? Before we get into it, I'm going to show you the method that I ended up figuring out. But if you want to see the whole thought process that made me come up with this idea, then you can check out my blog down in the description. Alright, so we got a very simple hero section here. And what I want to do basically is I want this to slide in first, this one second, this one third, and I want the image to come in at the same time as the button, but I want it to come from the right. So these come from the left, this one comes from the right. This is not super complicated to do with GSAP or even Webflow animations, but I won't always have the same hero section. So maybe I have one more piece of text, maybe I have another button, maybe I have something else on the right. I want to be able to somehow have control over how things move without having to create a new animation for each section. So let's open the CSS here. And first of all, we need some attribute to target. For me, I'm just going to call this hero load. And this will be the attribute that I'm going to be using to target all the animation that I'll be doing. Now let's give this some properties. And we will start with transition property. And here we want to transition the transform and the opacity, so the movement and the visibility of this element. Next, we will define the duration of this animation, and then we will also define some easing. These three properties will be applied to everything, so we can keep them on the attribute itself. But now we want to be able to add a value to this attribute, control what it does. So we can go down here, and I'm gonna paste these in. And basically what we're doing here is, if the value of hero load is 1, we will set the delay to 0, which is the default of course, but I prefer to have it there visible rather than starting from 2. If it's 2, we will have 0.2, and if it's 3, we will have 0.3. Now, how do we make them move? Well, we need something to trigger that transition. So what we can do here is we can add a loading class on the body, and that will be added when the page starts loading, and then we can remove it when we want the animation to actually play. So the loading class will be the one that sets the initial state for each element. So here I'm just gonna go down here, and what we're doing here is that we are targeting the loading class, and when the hero load is inside of a loading class, we will move everything to -40 pixels on the X, and we'll also set the opacity to 0. We can already see this working over here. So if I go to the body and I give it a class of loading, nothing happens because we didn't add the attribute yet. So we're gonna go to the H1, add here the hero load attribute, and it already moves. Let's add it to the rest of them. And now everything is invisible. One last thing I want to add here is, at the end of this, we will also add a new value that is called right, and this makes it go to the other side. So instead of -40, we have 40. And we will add this to the image so that it goes to the other side because it's on the right. So let's call this right, and you can see it moving right there. Now that's cool. We have the loading class, and if we remove it, there we go, everything slides in just as we expect. Now let's make it a bit staggered, let's make it a bit nicer. We can go to each of these elements, and we can start by giving this one the value of 1, this one 2, this one 3. We'll also give this one 3. But you see, we already have right here. So let's give it a 3 and then we'll see how we can fix this in order to be able to put multiple values into the same attribute and combine different animations into one. Let's go up here and check it out with the loading class. So there we go. And when we add it back, we'll see everything comes in the order that we expect. But again, we want to combine the right with 3 in order to make the image come in from the other side. So let me introduce you this wavy symbol. Maybe I'll zoom in here if it's not visible, but we can add this before the equal sign on each of these. And this tells it that instead of looking for an attribute where we have an exact match to this value, we just want this value to exist within the hero load attribute, and we can add multiple values if we separate them with a space. So here we can say 3 space right, and now both of these attributes are actually applied, and we can test that out by just adding a class again. And you can see that it already went to the right, and if we add it back, it comes in from the right again. One last thing is that maybe you want to combine rotation and scaling. Well, unfortunately, it's not super simple because they all belong to the transform property. But some new CSS properties came out which allow us to separate translate, scale, and rotations into their own properties. And if we go to can I use, we will see that these properties are already supported by all major browsers. But what this means for us is that we can replace this with 3 other properties. So translate, scale, and rotate. Unfortunately, we cannot separate the translate into Y and X, but it's good enough as it is. And now we can actually do some crazier stuff like combining 3 and right and scale and rotation. And now we can go back here, add a loading class, and we have everything going in. The only problem is that this didn't actually animate properly because I forgot to add the correct properties up here. So instead of transform, now we need to specify scale, translate, and rotate. So let's try this again. And you can see that the button rotated, scaled, and moved at the same time. And it was the third element to actually move. So now we have this composable way of creating load animations, except we didn't actually cover how we will know when the page loads. And honestly, that's really the easiest part. Let me just remove this class. In a JS embed, and I would suggest that you put it as high up as possible in the body, we will go up here and we'll say document body class list add loading. So as soon as this part is loaded, we will be adding the loading class to the body, and this actually runs before any of our content will even render, which means we won't have some weird flashes where we see the unstyled state. And then we can say window add event listener, and here we can specify load, and load fires when all the scripts and the DOM are loaded, which means everything is properly loaded. And now I'm just gonna copy this, and instead of add, we'll say remove. And this would basically do what we were doing manually so far with the body class loading. And we can just publish this really quick. I already have it published. And you can see that it works well. I can hard refresh. So this is Command Shift R. and we don't get a weird flash. We always get a clean animation. So what do you think? Is it good? Is it bad? Would you use it? I'm still not too sure. I'll probably use it in a few projects, maybe smaller ones, but I'll have to play around with it a bit more to see how much I want to use it in bigger projects.